The Silent Hill series has long been a cornerstone of psychological horror, with its eerie atmospheres, unsettling narratives, and deeply personal scares. Its influence can be felt across the gaming landscape, influencing indie developers to create their own versions of psychological horror. Today, we're going to look at 10 of those indie games that capture that same spirit of Silent Hill. Unsound Mind structures its story around fractured memories, guiding players through distinct chapters that introduce new rules, mechanics, and psychological twists. One level may feel like a puzzle-heavy nightmare, another a warped platforming trial, and yet another a rhythm-based test of perception. A story emerges during these shifts as each environment reflects a character's inner fears, regrets, or unresolved trauma. The game rewards careful observation, subtle audio cues, odd object placement, and hidden messages that hint at a larger truth, encouraging players to read between the lines. Combat and inventory do exist in this game, but those are secondary to exploration and engagement with the world itself. The result is a layered, experimental narrative that feels playful, but very unsettling. Enigma of Fear is less about running from the dark and more about untangling it. You play as Mia, a paranormal detective searching for the forbidden perimeter for her missing father. The place doesn't officially exist, but its halls are littered with strange documents, puzzles, and evidence that demand close attention. Every room feels less like a battleground and more like a crime scene waiting to be reconstructed. The horror isn't just in the monsters, though you'll meet plenty of those, but in realizing the rules of this place don't line up with reality. Your anchor through all this is Loopy, Mia's loyal dog who helps you hold on to sanity when things get overwhelming. Enigma of Fear keeps you guessing, not with cheap shocks, but with the creeping suspicion that understanding the truth may be worse than staying in the dark. Heartworm is less about ghosts and monsters and more about what grief can do when it's left unresolved. You play as Sam, a young woman who struggles to move on after losing someone close. Her obsession with finding a way to the afterlife leads her to an abandoned house that might be a doorway between worlds. From there, the story blurs the line between memory and reality. The fixed camera angles and deliberate controls are more than just retro flavor here. They reinforce the feeling of being caught in a snapshot of the past. Even the photography mechanic fits that theme. The camera is both a tool and a weapon. You take photographs to reveal hidden clues, interact with objects, and even repel hostile entities. The house shifts and distorts as you dig deeper, sometimes appearing ordinary and sometimes warped into nightmare spaces. Heartworm is unsettling not just because of the jump scares, but because it captures the way grief can warp a person's perspective. Visage takes place in a house that feels alive with grief and memory. Rather than one clear story, the game unfolds in chapters tied to the lives of its past residents, and each chapter is essentially a self-contained tragedy, giving you fragments of a family that once lived there or a person whose mind unraveled within its walls. The storytelling isn't handed to you directly, it's hidden in details like a photo with one face scratched away, a drawer that won't stay shut, or a child's toy suddenly relocated. The sense of dread builds slowly, and survival isn't about fighting back so much as keeping your sanity intact. Light becomes your most valuable tool, both to see and push back the darkness that seems eager to swallow you whole. What makes Visage powerful isn't just the atmosphere, but how it forces you to walk through these personal histories of despair, leaving you with the uneasy sense that the house isn't just haunted, it's hungry. Detention grounds its horror story in lived history. Set in 1960s Taiwan under martial law, the game places you in a school where oppressive silence and unspoken guilt weigh as heavily as the supernatural threats. As you explore classrooms, auditoriums, and ritual spaces, the story of political persecution slowly surfaces through letters, personal notes, and symbolic objects. Ghosts appear, but they're not random monsters. They're bound to the tragedies of the time, and avoiding them often feels like dodging memories as much as enemies. The puzzles and exploration are pretty straightforward, but their meaning grows as you connect them to the larger context. The spirits and curses you encounter serve as echoes of real pain, and the school itself becomes a metaphor for an era defined by fear and silence. The result is a shocking narrative that lingers long after your heartbeat finally returns to normal. Hollowbody imagines a near-future city that's been cut off, left to rot under quarantine, and then asks what it would feel like to be trapped inside. You play as a courier stranded in this forgotten district, navigating its collapsing infrastructure and the things that still linger there. Story fragments emerge through the apartments you search, the notes you find, and the traces of people who never made it out. But rather than overwhelming you with constant action, the game thrives on restraint. Limited resources, enemies too risky to fight head-on, and long stretches of uneasy exploration broken by sudden confrontation. One thing I want to note is that the game textures are an incredibly immersive part of this world. Rain-slicked streets, buzzing neon signs, and then the soundscapes that feel more like vibrations in your chest than just background music. Hollowbody doesn't just place you in a horror setting, it makes you inhabit a space that feels abandoned, dangerous, and strangely intimate, as though you're trespassing somewhere you shouldn't be. Cry of Fear started as a Half-Life mod and grew into one of the most enduring free horror games on Steam. You step into the shoes of Simon, a young man stranded in a deserted Swedish city, relying on nothing more than a flickering phone light and whatever makeshift weapon you can scavenge. Right away, the game makes you feel vulnerable. Inventory space is limited, the menu doesn't pause the world, and even healing carries side effects that blur your vision. And the game thrives on atmosphere, shifting you between quiet city streets and distorted nightmare zones that mirror Simon's fragile state of mind. Multiple endings push you to replay and consider your choices, while combat stays clumsy enough to keep every encounter feel tense. On top of the single-player story, Cry of Fear also includes a dedicated co-op campaign for up to 4 players, turning personal dread into a shared struggle. Lone Survivor drops you into an abandoned city overrun by a mysterious infection, where every alley and every apartment feels empty yet charged with unease. You play as a nameless protagonist trying to survive while navigating both the physical dangers of the world and the fragile state of your own mind. The psychological component is central. Hallucinations blur the line between reality and imagination, and your mental state can influence which ending you see, making every decision feel weighty. Encounters with infected humans and other strange entities are dangerous precisely because you rarely ever have the tools for a direct confrontation, encouraging stealth, creative problem-solving, and very careful planning. It's the kind of game that forces that uncomfortable self-reflection about what it means to maintain your humanity when the world around you has fallen apart. Lost in Vivo begins with something terrifyingly simple. Your service dog is swept away into an underground storm drain, and you have no choice but to follow. What could have been a straightforward rescue mission quickly turns into a descent through suffocating tunnels, abandoned subway cars, and spaces that don't quite make sense. The story surfaces less from cutscenes and more from how the environment itself begins to unravel. Staircases that bend wrong, doors that lead to impossible rooms, and sudden transitions that feel like being pulled into a dream you can't wake from. What makes the experience memorable isn't just the claustrophobic level design or the extremely unnerving sound design, but the emotional anchor of what you're chasing after. Every step forward feels heavier because what's at stake is so personal. It's a horror game that asks you just how far would you really go to save someone special. Signalis blends survival horror with a personal story about love and memory, set against the backdrop of a collapsing future. You play as Elster, a replica unit searching for her missing partner in a frozen colony that's falling apart. The surface-level gameplay feels familiar: tight corridors, limited resources, enemies that always feel too close. But beneath that structure lies a narrative that steadily fractures into something stranger. Environments loop back on themselves, documents contradict what you thought you knew, and surreal visions hint at something vast and incomprehensible behind it all. Despite its cosmic scope, the heart of the game is grounded in Elster's determination to keep a promise, no matter what it costs. The sterile, retro-futuristic aesthetic makes every location feel cold and inhuman, But the emotional undercurrent keeps the story from becoming detached. For all its cosmic dread, Signalis is ultimately about devotion, about clinging to love, even when the universe itself is unraveling. Silent Hill is just the reference point we used for the vibe, a legacy built on psychological terror and unease through game design. These 10 games approach that goal from different angles, some through investigation, some through tool limitation, and some just making you question reality. Try one for an hour, and you'll probably want to come back for more. Try more than that, and good luck sleeping tonight. If you did like this video, make sure you subscribe, throw us a like, and make sure to go check out my podcast, Indie Game Arcade, where we do updates on the latest and greatest indie games 2 times a week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.